When girls started disappearing in the city, no one could suspect him. He simply didn't fit the description of a suspect. Kind, cheerful, generous, he spoke with friends and relatives of the missing every day. But he had a terrible secret. He is Bad Henry. Today we will talk about what Henry Wallace did. And get ready, this is not the most pleasant story. But let's dive into this terrible case without further ado. According to Fortune magazine, at the end of the 20th century, the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, had the best business prospects in the country. In 1994 alone, over 14,000 new jobs were created. And for this reason, economists placed Charlotte 8th on the list of American cities expected to reach peak economic growth in the coming decades. In that same year, 1994, the city was the third largest banking center in the United States and the sixth largest wholesale trade center. The issue of crime was a bit more complicated, as officially the police were winning the war on crime. However, along with rapid economic growth, a huge problem emerged in the city: drugs. And also, between 1992 and 1994, something strange was happening. Police were repeatedly notified of a series of suspiciously similar crimes. Someone who seemed absolutely elusive was hunting women in East Charlotte. According to FBI reports, in 1993, over 51,000 crimes were registered in Charlotte. Almost 10,000 of them were classified as violent. The police were particularly interested in extremely similar crimes, the first 3 of which occurred within 1 year, and the remaining 8 happened over the next 10 months. The police did not expect a serial killer. How could you even expect that? And obviously, such a possibility is not considered until the very last moment, when it becomes simply impossible to dismiss this version. After all, if all the crimes are committed by the same person, then the cases must be solved as soon as possible to save the lives of other innocent people. So, where did it all begin? On June 19, 1992, the manager of the Bojangles restaurant on Central Avenue contacted a girl named Kathy Love to tell her that her sister Caroline had not shown up for work for several days. He asked her to check if everything was okay. Kathy got scared and went to Caroline's apartment, and, finding her sister at home, she left her a note. Kathy Love contacted Sandy McKnight and asked where Caroline might be. Sandy said that it was indeed strange, because usually, even if Caroline spent the night with friends, she would definitely let her know. Then Kathy Love and Sandy McKnight went to the police and told them about their concerns. Investigator Anthony Rice questioned the manager of the restaurant and learned that the last time he saw Caroline was when she left work on the evening of the 15th. She asked him to exchange $10 for quarters to use in the laundry. And for cousin Robert Ross, who drove her home that night, said he saw her entering the building and she didn't look worried. During a search of the apartment, the police suspected that a fight had taken place there. The furniture seemed to have been moved slightly. It was also strange that the sheet from Caroline's bed was removed and was not in the laundry basket. Anthony Rice determined that Caroline never took her clothes to the laundry. However, the quarters she was given at work were not in the apartment. Charlotte police continued to search for Caroline Love, but all leads came to a dead end. She was declared missing, and her fate remained a mystery. 8 months later, on February 19, 1993, Mrs. Sylvia Sumter came home from work. She was going to cook dinner for her teenage daughter named Shona Hogg. But the girl did not come home. Sylvia wondered where her daughter was. She was supposed to come home from college much earlier. The mother could not understand why her coat and purse were left in the living room. Shona never left home without her purse, and certainly would not go outside in winter without a coat. Calling Shona's boyfriend, Sylvia learned that he had not seen the girl all day. Then she called the local Taco Bell where Shona worked part-time, but they told her that Shona's shifts were not on the schedule. Mrs. Sumter began to worry, especially when relatives called her home and asked why the girl did not take her godson to school as promised. Shona's boyfriend immediately came to the girl's house to help Sylvia. After searching the entire apartment and finding no clues, Shona's boyfriend went to the bathroom, and there he was met with a horrifying discovery. The carpet was wet and the shower curtain was drawn. He moved it aside and saw Shona. The girl lay fully clothed in the water. Her eyes looked lifelessly at him through the clear water. Shona Hogg's death was confirmed at the hospital. There were cuts and bruises on her head from a blow. The doctor who examined her diagnosed that she had been strangled. Pathologist James Sullivan, who performed the autopsy, noted hemorrhaging in the mucous membranes of the eyes. This occurs due to ruptured capillaries as a result of a person's lack of access to oxygen. The police were called to the hospital. Colleagues, friends, classmates, all were questioned, but no suspect or motive was found. Another 4 months would pass before a similar case attracted police attention again. Now we are talking about Audrey Spain. She was 24 years old. She was considered a reliable employee at work, so when she did not show up at Taco Bell for 2 evenings in a row, on June 23rd and 24, her manager realized something had happened. He called her, but the call went to voicemail. Calling her sister's number, he also got no answer. Then he decided to go to where Audrey lived. Her car was parked in the lot, so he entered the building and knocked on her apartment door. There was no answer. In the morning, still unable to reach Audrey or her sister, he called the cleaner, and when he entered the apartment with his key, his gaze immediately fell on the open bedroom door. There he saw something resembling a naked woman lying in bed. Coming closer, he realized it was Audrey. Her face was gray and her chest was frozen in one position. A t-shirt and bra were wrapped around her neck. Forensic experts concluded that the cause of death was strangulation, and there were also signs of sexual assault. Now the police had photos of Caroline Love, Shona Hogg, and Audrey Spain. One of them was missing. The other two, almost identical situations with a difference of only a few months, and no witnesses, no signs of a break-in, and no suspects. And what may seem surprising now is that no one conducted these 3 crimes. Each was considered separately, and the investigation into the fates of these 3 unfortunate girls practically came to a halt as the police were forced to deal with other crimes occurring in Charlotte in the middle of summer. Valencia Jumper was an ambitious college student. She had recently moved from Columbia, South Carolina. She worked in 2 places at once, in a grocery store and a clothing store. This way she could pay for her studies. But in August 1993, her life ended. And how it happened was so unusual that even the most experienced detective would not have suspected anything. On the night of August 9th, her boyfriend named Zachary Douglas smelled smoke as he approached Valencia's apartment door. Then he saw clouds of black smoke coming from under the front door. Finding the door locked, he knocked on a neighbor's door and asked to call the firefighters. They soon arrived at the scene and broke down Valencia's door. Once inside, the firefighters saw that the flames had spread throughout the apartment from the kitchen. There was a pot left on the lit gas stove. The flames reached the bedroom where it seemed Valencia had been sleeping in her bed. The next day, the coroner examined the charred remains and concluded that Valencia died from thermal burns. This story would be forgotten and not connected with the other crimes, but the one who did this would not stop there. The next would be Michelle Stinson. She met her death on September 15th, 5 weeks after Valencia's death. She died from strangulation. There were also characteristic signs of a male attack on her body. However, she also had a stab wound in the back. She was found in the kitchen while her sons were on the living room sofa. One was 3, the other 1-year-old. They did not see or hear anything. The police continued to question relatives and friends, but they made no progress in the case. And although they finally began to notice terrifying similarities, there was still nothing in common between these girls. Well, of course, except for their place of residence and the fact that they were all African American. Newspapers began to write about what was happening, and the Black community was outraged. It seemed to them that the cases were not being investigated precisely because of the skin color of the victims. In Charlotte at that time, a third of the residents were African American. So rumors and news about the police being so negligent towards them spread very quickly. Moreover, East Charlotte was and remains a lively urban area, mainly inhabited by middle-class representatives. The housing there is quite modest, but the area is developing rapidly, and it is relatively safe. It's an area where people like to walk calmly, where children go to school on their own. Many city residents refuse to understand why the police could not search more intensively for the person responsible for all this. He literally slipped through their fingers. Investigators assured that they were doing everything in their power, that city police were working day and night to solve these cases, and that patrol cars were stopping everyone who seemed suspicious to them, reports Charles Costin from the State University. At an emergency press conference, representatives of the police department stated that the investigation would continue. Detective Gary McFadden was appointed lead investigator in this case. Moreover, they did this just a few hours before the press conference. He himself, being a Black man, did not find support from local residents. For them, he was like a scapegoat, and he understood people's fears perfectly. Now he had to not only solve these complicated cases, but also find words to address the people. But McFadden, being a professional, had to do his duty. The entire Black community hated me, and in a way, I felt like a scapegoat. But I personally spoke with each affected family, and I managed to calm them down. I expressed my sympathy and also convinced them of my determination to bring the one who did this to their loved ones to court. In the fall of 1993, the situation seemed to begin to come under control. Due to public pressure, the police increased the number of patrol cars in the city. And perhaps this scared off the criminal, or criminals, because at that time, they were not sure that all this was being done by the same person. Nevertheless, people felt that this was just the calm before the storm, and their fears were not unfounded. On Sunday, February 20th, 1994, Vanessa Mack's mother, Barbara, came to pick up her grandson. She did this every Sunday so Vanessa could go to work at the Carolina Medical Center. She arrived a little earlier than usual and was very surprised to find the front door ajar. Assuming her daughter was home, she hoped to be greeted. However, there was silence behind the door. Entering the hallway, Barbara realized something was wrong. Vanessa's 4-month-old baby was sleeping on the sofa. He was in the clothes he had been wearing since yesterday. Vanessa herself was nowhere to be found. Not in the kitchen, not in the bathroom, not in the bedroom. At least, that's how it seemed. However, when Barbara looked closer, she saw that what she first thought was a folded blanket was actually her daughter. She was wrapped in a blanket. Barbara came closer and looked. Something was wrapped around Vanessa's throat. It looked like a pillowcase. Her skin was cold and her face was pale. Barbara ran out into the hallway. There, she knocked on her neighbor's door and called the police. Jeff Baumgartner was the first police officer to arrive at the scene. He just glanced at the scene with the girl on the bed and immediately understood everything. It was the work of the same strangler. Meanwhile, Sergeant McFadden was trying to find answers to his questions. His people questioned possible suspects, those who had a criminal past, or maybe someone known in the African American community, someone everyone trusted and would let into their home. Detectives also renewed contact with the families and friends of all the deceased girls, hoping to find a thread that would connect them all. Perhaps they vacationed in the same place, or maybe they worked together at some point, or went to the same school. Maybe they were all just friends with the same person. But since each case was considered separately, and a separate investigator was assigned to each of them, witness statements were not compared, and the cases were not linked together for a long time. In the end, the city police turned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for help. But even now, no new information could be obtained. The one who did this is free, and he does not look like an ordinary criminal because all the girls obviously knew him, says Charles Costin, a professor of criminal law at the University of North Carolina. But right at this time, on March 9th, when the police were racking their brains over who could be a common acquaintance of these girls, Betty Bockham did not come to work at the restaurant name. There, she worked as an assistant manager. Since it was the same diner on Central Avenue where Caroline Love worked before she disappeared, manager Jeffrey Ellis was alarmed. He called her home, but there was no answer. All night he hoped that the girl would show up any minute, but no. The next day she was supposed to come to work again, but she never appeared. Ellis called the police. Officer Gregory Norwood answered the call. Entering Betty's apartment, Norwood found the girl lying on the bed. She was fully dressed and lying face down on the mattress. A towel was twisted into a loop around her neck. The girl's apartment was robbed, completely. Moreover, her car was stolen. Her blue Nissan Pulsar disappeared from the parking lot. Patrols were alerted about the car, and everyone was now looking for a bluish Pulsar. At the same time, investigators conducted a raid on local pawn shops. But just as all this was happening, the police dispatcher called a squad to the apartment of a girl named Brandy Henderson. Her boyfriend had just found her lifeless body. When the police arrived, they realized it was the same apartment complex where Betty Bockham had just been discovered. Moreover, the crime scene was a real chaos. Brandy's boyfriend, who called the police, lived with the girl, and he had just returned home from working the night shift and discovered a terrible scene. The apartment was robbed, the girl had shorts tied across her neck, and their shared child was barely breathing. Fortunately, the child survived. Well, that is, the serial killer is not afraid of the police, or deliberately wants to get caught by them, or simply does not control himself and attacks everyone he knows. Detectives simply could not believe it. In the apartment complex right under their noses, where a squad was still on duty, the whole story was repeating itself. Gary McFadden urgently gathered his team for a meeting early the next morning. His goal was to compare all the records made during interviews with friends, relatives, and acquaintances of the deceased girls. And in these records, it turns out there is one very interesting point. The girls, it seems, really did not know each other. The clubs they went to were different. But when relatives were asked to list the names of people whom the girls might open the door for and let into the house, they all, among others, mentioned the same name: Henry Louis Wallace. Shona Hogg and Audrey Spain once worked at Taco Bell, and their manager was Henry Wallace. Valencia Jumper was a friend of Wallace's sister named Yvonne. Michelle Stinson often ate at Taco Bell and chatted with Wallace. Vanessa Mack was the sister of one of his ex-girlfriends. Betty Backham was a friend of Wallace's current girlfriend, Sadie McKnight. Brandy Henderson was the girlfriend of one of Wallace's friends. Returning to the open case of missing Caroline Love, detectives realized that Love also knew him well. She was the roommate of Sadie McKnight, his girlfriend, whom Wallace often visited. And suddenly, Sergeant McFadden realizes with surprise that Henry Louis Wallace had already been on the police radar. He failed to appear in court on theft charges. They compared his mugshot and photos obtained from an ATM camera when he tried to withdraw money from a stolen card of one of the girls. And voila! In both photos, the man has the same cross earring. Investigators went to Wallace's girlfriend. When the police approached Sadie McKnight, she was very surprised that her boyfriend Henry was a suspect. But the more she thought about it, the more true it seemed to her. All this time, Henry gave her gifts, bracelets, rings, and necklaces. They sometimes seemed very familiar to her. And looking back, Sadie realized that all this time she had been wearing the jewelry of her deceased friends, says Charles Coston. Detective Gary McFadden wondered, was it all just a coincidence? Gary knew these women. I wonder if he has an alibi. Will it be possible to prove that he was in these girls' houses? And then the detective is informed that Betty Bockham's car, her Pulsar, has been found at the other end of the city. And a palm print was found on the trunk. And they matched Wallace's print stored in the database. Bingo. On the evening of March 11th until the next day, the police watched the house where Wallace lived. Officers tracked him down at a friend's house, and at about 5 p.m., they handcuffed him. According to the arrest report, the suspect was sober, very calm, and alert. He surrendered without a fight. Following orders from their supervisor, patrol officers took him to the Public Safety Center, where a small team of plainclothes officers eagerly awaited him, and they had a few questions for him. But at the time when the detectives gathered at this center to speak with the suspect, another body was found in the city. It was Deborah Slaughter, and everything at the crime scene pointed to the same handwriting. She became the last. And yes, she was also a close friend of Henry Louis Wallace. So Wallace was brought into the interrogation room. The suspect was asked if he knew why he was there. And at first he said it was probably because of his theft charge. But over the next few hours, he was interrogated and confessed that he was responsible for the deaths of 9 women: Caroline Love, Shona Hogg, Audrey Spain, Valencia Jumper, Michelle Stinson, Vanessa Mack, Betty Bockham, Brandy Henderson, and Deborah Slaughter. Moreover, news about the last girl had not even been reported yet, and Wallace did not start confessing immediately. At first, he withdrew and could not utter a word.
But when one of the detectives entered the room and suggested praying, Wallace agreed. They all held hands and in prayer asked God not to be present during the discussion of what bad Henry had done. After the prayer, Wallace took a sheet and wrote the names of all the women on it. The detectives had not suspected the connection of some of them with Henry, and then he began his long story.
At about 10 p.m. after the first interrogation, he was asked if he would agree to record his confession on tape. He nodded and replied that, having already confessed to what he had done, he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from him. Speaking into the microphone, Wallace introduced his listeners to the disgusting details of his crimes. He described everything from his thoughts during the process, the last words of the girls and their actions, to the agony they fell into in the last seconds. Although he robbed their homes, the primary motive was still sexual. The interview was led by Sergeant Patrick Sanders, who is known for always remaining calm. Sanders was accompanied by other detectives, and they were all there during the continuous series of confessions throughout the night. They asked questions and clarified every detail. At one point, Sanders told Wallace that he didn't seem like a bad person by nature, and asked Wallace if he thought he might have schizophrenia. No, there is only one Henry. This is Bad Henry. Henry Louis Wallace was born on November 4, 1965, in Barnwell, South Carolina. The boy grew up with his single mother, Lottie Wallace, his great-grandmother, and an older sister named Yvonne. They were 3 years apart. Henry never saw his father, who was a school teacher. He and Lottie were not married. The Wallace family lived very poorly. The mother worked in a textile mill and could not support the family on her salary. According to some sources, their house had neither running water nor electricity. The Wallaces drank from a well, and their bathroom was filled with chamber pots that Henry had to empty and clean. By the way, potty training, a normal process for everyone,
became a hellish ordeal for Henry. If he wet his pants, he was punished by his mother and great-grandmother. He wore his sister's hand-me-downs, as the family had no money for new clothes. The mother was a despotic woman, scolded Henry for trifles, controlled him, and suppressed him emotionally. When she decided that one of them had misbehaved, they had to choose their own method of punishment. But that's just the beginning. One source claims that 7-year-old Henry witnessed a gang rape, and how this could have affected his psyche is a rhetorical question. Nevertheless, Henry really wanted to be like his friends. All the children had dads they could play with, fly kites with. And when he asked his mother about his father, who he was and where he went, she brushed him off and demanded that her son stop being idle. And when Wallace was in 6th grade, his father called on the phone, introduced himself, and told the boy that he had always wanted to meet him and even promised to come by within a week. But he never came. And this incident also left a scar on Henry's soul. Despite the dysfunctional atmosphere at home, Wallace was popular in high school. He became a member of the student council and also the only male cheerleader. He did this despite his mother's prohibitions, who did not allow him to play football. At the same time, he was not an object of ridicule. On the contrary, with his enthusiasm and creative approach, he aroused admiration from both students and school staff. The cheerleaders adored Henry for his politeness and friendly attitude, but his academic achievements were not as brilliant. Nevertheless, after graduating from high school in 1983, Henry spent one semester at South Carolina State College and one at a technical college. His IQ was 92. But studies attracted Wallace less than work. The owner of a low, velvety voice and a good sense of humor, he successfully worked part-time as a DJ at a local radio station. He even had the pseudonym Night Rider. But as soon as Henry was caught stealing records and CDs, he was fired. Then, Wallace chose a career available to many young Americans. He became a military man. Henry served in the Navy for 8 years, traveling all over the world. He received praise more than once during his service. In 1985, Henry married a girl named Moretta Brenham, with whom he had fallen in love back in school. His beloved already had a growing daughter named Amy, whom he accepted as his own. Wallace dreamed of his own children. However, Moretta was adamant, and soon the couple's romantic life faded away, adding additional tension to their relationship. While serving in the Navy, soon after getting married, Henry became addicted to drugs. It was the crack era. To somehow find money for forbidden pleasures, he committed several burglaries in the Seattle area. And in January '88, he was caught trying to rob a hardware store. Wallace pleaded guilty, and the judge sentenced him to 2 years probation. And he had to check in, but according to his probation officer Patrick Seaborg, he did not appear for most of the mandatory meetings. In February 1991, Wallace broke into the school he attended and the radio station where he once worked. When trying to sell stolen video and audio recording equipment from there, he was caught. In 1992, Wallace's military career ended. He was fired, caught breaking into and illegally entering a naval base. Thanks to an almost impeccable service record, Wallace managed to receive an honorable discharge from the Navy. And unsurprisingly, after all these incidents, his wife left him. In November, Henry returned to his mother and sister, who now lived in Charlotte. But the move did not bode well either. There was no permanent work. Henry tried to work part-time and fast food, but did not stay anywhere long. He was only lucky with the Taco Bell diner, where Wallace got a manager position and soon got a girlfriend. And then, in December '92, this girlfriend of his became pregnant. This was a brief biography of Wallace.
In fact, the first attack occurred even before he moved to Charlotte. In 1990, in his hometown of Barnwell, Wallace attacked 18-year-old Tashonda Beckia and dumped her body in a pond. He would tell this already in prison. There was talk that Henry was even in love with her, and they dated for a while. So, now let's deal with each incident in order. In May '92, Sharon Nance, a prostitute known in the city, was unlucky enough to meet Wallace. He refused to pay her for intimate services provided. Her body soon ended up near the railroad tracks. Wallace confessed to this while already under investigation. Then a month later, in June of the same year, Wallace took the keys to the apartment of his then-girlfriend, Sadie McKnight. She shared housing with a friend named Carolyn Love. Both worked in the same restaurant, and when Carolyn returned home, Wallace was waiting for her there. They were acquainted, so the girl was not surprised by his appearance. Wallace kissed her on the cheek, but the girl got angry and asked him to stop. After all, she had a boyfriend, but if Wallace promised not to do it again, then she would not tell her boyfriend about it. Henry was not satisfied with this answer. He applied a chokehold, undressing Carolyn, and after satisfying his fantasies, dumped Carolyn in a ditch within the city. Later, he would confess that he visited the remains 3 times, describing in detail the changes that occurred to the body. About 2 days later, I returned and she looked like an alien, a doll or something like that. I returned a week later and only bones were left, he said during interrogation. When Carolyn did not make contact, her sister Kathy tried to find out from Sadie, Wallace's girlfriend, where her roommate was. Not finding answers to their questions, the women went to the police station and filed a missing person report for Carolyn. Henry accompanied them to the station, and Carolyn was discovered only in '94. In February '93, Wallace dropped by to visit his 20-year-old subordinate, Shona Hogg, a local college student who worked part-time at Taco Bell. When he appeared on her doorstep, the girl let him into the house without a doubt. According to Wallace, he was able to win Shona over and they had a pleasant conversation for about an hour. The girl even didn't hesitate to joke with him when he said he had quarreled with his girlfriend Sadie. Saying goodbye, Henry hugged Shona and said he wouldn't mind stopping by her bedroom for a while. The girl rejected such a bold offer, but soon he forcefully dragged the crying Shona into the bedroom, where he acted according to a well-established scheme. Having gotten what he wanted, he took her to the bathroom, turned on the water, used his towel technique, and left the lifeless Shona in the water. Taking $50 from the girl's purse, Henry left the house. Hogg's body was found by her boyfriend and mother. There were no suspects. Henry attended Shona's funeral and even hugged and comforted the girl's mother. The next was 24-year-old Audrey Spain, also a Taco Bell employee. She was appointed shift supervisor at the diner and was well acquainted with Wallace. Her life would end in June '93. As soon as Audrey returned from vacation, Henry showed up on her doorstep. Wallace came counting on Audrey telling him the code to the safe where the proceeds were kept at the diner. He talked to Audrey, offered to do drugs together, and all this weakened her vigilance. But Henry had already planned everything. He chose the right moment and attacked Audrey, demanding the code to the safe at work, but she didn't know it. Henry was furious, and she had no money at home as she had spent everything on vacation. This finally enraged Wallace, and he strangled Audrey while she was undressed. When she regained consciousness, he repeated the same with her until she stopped breathing. He got rid of evidence by washing her in the shower. Wallace left Audrey's house, taking her credit card. In August of that year, a friend of Wallace's sister named Valencia Jumper would be next. Yvonne and Valencia became friends while studying at university, and Wallace met Valencia at the supermarket where she worked as a cashier. The pretext for meeting at Valencia's house was some problem he wanted to discuss. He supposedly wanted to ask for advice. After chatting a bit, Wallace asked Valencia to call his girlfriend Sadie, and when Valencia turned her back to him, Wallace repeated what he did every time. But now he doused the apartment with rum and set it on fire to hide the traces. Before leaving, he took some jewelry from the body, which he later pawned. Valencia's death was considered an accident.
and Wallace accompanied his sister to her friend's funeral. And only after his arrest would another analysis be conducted, and it would be proven that indeed Valencia died not from the fire, but from a chokehold. Valencia was like a little sister to me. I don't know why I hurt her. She begged me not to do it. She was ready to do anything, but she quickly stopped breathing. Then I went to her kitchen and noticed a bottle of rum there. I opened a can of stew and beans and put a pot on the stove. I took the battery out of the smoke detector and turned the stove on high, he said during interrogation. Literally 5 weeks after this, Wallace chose a new victim, a 20-year-old girl named Michelle Stinson, a frequent visitor to Taco Bell. He was friends with Michelle. Michelle was a college student and a single mother raising 2 young sons. They were 1 and 3 years old. Wallace appeared on her doorstep and again used his friendly conversation to win Michelle over. Henry would later confess that he directly told the girl about his desire to, so to speak, take their friendship to a new level. But Michelle replied that she had some kind of disease. And to this, Wallace demanded to show the medicine she was taking to get better. But Michelle couldn't find it. Henry became enraged. He seemed to repeat his dirty ritual automatically. However, this time, a knife was in Wallace's hand. Running away from the house, he threw the knife and the washcloth he used to wash off the traces over the fence in the backyard. And when one of Michelle's acquaintances knocked on the house, her 3-year-old son answered that Mom is sleeping on the kitchen floor. In February '94, just a few weeks after being arrested for shoplifting, Wallace attacked the sister of one of his subordinates. Vanessa Mack, a single mother raising 2 young daughters, met Henry through her sister. Wallace again used his charm, talked with the girl a bit, then asked her to hug him. Vanessa refused. Then Henry suggested having a drink together. As soon as the girl turned around, Henry pulled a pillowcase from under his shirt and threw it over Vanessa's face. He wanted to steal her bank card and find out the PIN. Having gotten what he wanted, Wallace laid the girl on the bed, and after ordering her to get dressed, he applied his signature move. Hailing a taxi, Henry drove to an ATM, but he failed to withdraw money from Vanessa's card. She had deceived him and given the wrong code. Since he couldn't get money from Vanessa and his crack addiction was too strong, Wallace went hunting again. In early March, Henry chose the manager of the restaurant where Carolyn Love worked, named Betty Balcom. She was 24 years old and lived in the Lake apartment complex. This time, the hall was larger. Wallace, after the attack, according to the old scheme, took a TV from her house. He stole her car and returned to the apartment for a tape recorder. Initially, he entered the house by telling Betty that he needed to use her phone. The girl was happy to help her friend's boyfriend. While Henry pretended to look for the right number, Betty turned away. Henry attacked her, demanding keys, the code to the safe, and the alarm at the restaurant where she was a manager. She tried to resist, but she gave the numbers. When Henry loosened his grip, she asked him why he did this to her, and Henry answered that he was just sick. According to his police confession, then Betty stood up and said she forgave him. But Wallace did not leave her like that, and he again ordered her to undress and then wrapped a towel around her neck. He took cash from her wallet and removed a gold chain from her.
Leaving Betty Balcom's apartment, Wallace walked down the hallway, straight to the apartment of Brandy Henderson, where, as he knew, she would be alone, knocking on her door. He said he wanted to give something to his friend, her boyfriend, Vernon Lamar, so she invited him in. Brandy suspected nothing. He chatted with her. Then, to lull her vigilance, he offered her a drink, and then attacked. However, this time everything did not go according to plan. Henry demanded money from Brandy, but all she had in the house was a Pringles chip can filled with change. Then Wallace ordered her to go to the bedroom and undress. For some reason, Brandy held her little son in her arms while Wallace fiddled with her. Finishing and making sure Brandy wasn't breathing, Wallace began to get rid of evidence. At that moment, her son cried, and not knowing what to do in this situation, Wallace panicked and switched his attention to him. Suddenly, the child stopped crying, and that saved him. She got on her knees and started praying because she was scared. I said I wouldn't hurt her. I said, hug me, and she hugged me. But I had already taken the towel, he confessed at the station. Wallace took a TV and stereo system from the house. He sold them for $175 and bought crack with that money. And Brandy was buried in a pink dress with a photo of her beloved son. By March 12, 1994, Charlotte police were already hunting for Wallace. The day before, they had found Betty's car, where they discovered Henry's fingerprint. Despite this, Wallace ended up at the house of Deborah Slaughter, a former colleague, his girlfriend with whom he was well acquainted. Henry knew that Deborah used drugs and wanted to persuade her to buy some from him, but she said she had no money even for rent. And then Wallace asked her for a drink. He, following his scheme, threw a towel over her neck. Wallace demanded that Deborah empty her purse, in which, as he knew she always carried a knife. Wallace grabbed it and swung. But Deborah was not ready to give up so quickly. She hit Henry and started calling for the police. Wallace knocked her to the floor, and 38 times his knife touched Deborah's body. And then Wallace took the money and left. A few hours later, he returned to her apartment for crack, and then fled to a friend. There, they would put handcuffs on him. Then followed long interrogations, from which we know all these details of what happened. Henry Louis Wallace was taken into custody. And suddenly, unexpectedly, in November '94, 8 months after Henry Louis Wallace confessed to his crimes, he filed a motion to stop the interrogations. He claimed that he was forced to make a confession. Because of this, the date of his trial had to be postponed for further investigation. Experts studied the case and announced their findings in April '95. Wallace's arguments were based mainly on the fact that he was not read his rights. However, according to the published report, he was only charged after detectives deemed there were sufficient suspicions. And this happened even before the recording of his official guilty plea. Then he was informed of the so-called Miranda rule, that he could say nothing and remain silent. However, he waived this right and voluntarily began his story. In addition, Wallace was given soft drinks and snacks from the beginning and allowed to take breaks to rest. He was not threatened. And as soon as Wallace began to confess, he continued to take breaks and continued to eat and drink regularly. And he was even given time to sleep. Wallace's motion also stated that he was induced to confess by detectives who allegedly promised to visit his daughter and his girlfriend Sadie McKnight. But the investigators denied this accusation, explaining that the names of his daughter and girlfriend came up in their conversation after Wallace had already agreed to confess. And this is clear from the transcript. The third charge brought by Wallace concerned the delay in presenting him to a judge. The defendant claimed that if he had been brought before a judge earlier, perhaps he would not have felt cornered and therefore would not have been forced to confess. The police in turn stated that the delay was due to the time required to record the confessions, and the defendant needed to sleep and eat. As a result, the investigation concluded that firstly, Wallace was read his rights and at the appropriate time. Secondly, he gave confessional statements voluntarily. And finally, the delay in delivering him to court was not caused by police bias, but occurred for objective reasons. The trial eventually began in September '96. The prosecutor argued for the death penalty, and attorney Isabel Day demanded life imprisonment, claiming that Wallace suffered from a mental illness and that he did all this thoughtlessly. According to FBI expert Robert Ressler, Wallace was a bad criminal. If he decided to become a criminal, then he did it wrong. Wallace seemed to take one step forward and two back. He took evidence and put it in the oven to destroy it, but he forgot to light the fire. Nevertheless, on January 7, 1997, Wallace was found guilty. On January 29th, he was sentenced to 9 death sentences. And hearing this, Wallace showed no emotion. However, after the sentencing, Wallace made a statement to the families of the deceased girls. None of these women, none of your daughters, mothers, sisters, and relatives in any way deserved what happened. They did nothing to me that could justify this. As the newspapers wrote, quote, the families who were in court that day didn't buy it. Newspapers quoted Kathy Love, sister of Caroline Love. I don't believe he regrets it. He lied to me for 2 years while my sister was considered missing. Other relatives agreed with her.
Attorney Isabel Gay continued to insist. Wallace is very sick. He is mentally unhealthy. And when the trial ended, she cried. But not because she lost the case, but because the emotions that she had to hold back for several months of litigation finally came out. After the trial, Henry Louis Wallace was transferred to the only prison with a death row, the Central Prison in Raleigh. The Charlotte police chief assured the public that now the women of the city could be safe. However, many members of the Black community criticized the police's behavior during the investigation, accusing them of neglect towards the deceased girls. Indeed, why did it take the police so long to catch such a terrible and such a careless villain? The mother of one of the girls said, "These girls were not famous people with high status. They were not special. And they were African American." Another woman said the police didn't care because they considered the deceased girls to be party girls who partied too much. However, both the press and family members described the girls as diligent, hardworking, and serious young women. Deborah Slaughter's father held the opinion that everything was influenced by the fact that the girls were Black. The girls were simply not interesting to the police. They didn't live in an expensive area, they weren't famous, they worked in ordinary diners, and they didn't have blonde hair or blue eyes. The National Women's Organization of Charlotte called for an independent attorney to investigate the actions of the police department, regardless of whether this issue is economic, racial, procedural, or managerial. This issue must be resolved so that all female residents of Charlotte can feel complete confidence in the ability of law enforcement to combat crime fairly and effectively.
Nevertheless, one of the reasons why the police department could not catch Wallace was the lack of experience in investigating a series of such crimes. In early '94, the department sought help from the FBI, and the FBI in turn mistakenly stated that there were several unrelated stories here. Wallace did not fit the profile of a serial killer. He was Black, while most such criminals are white. Most often, they attack strangers, and here, the man clearly knew the girls. Most likely, both reasons influenced the fact that the police reacted so slowly to what was happening. And one would like to believe that both the first and second factors are no longer relevant. For now, the prisoner sits in the Central Prison, 3 hours' drive from Charlotte. He has gained a lot of weight in prison, and he is kept away from other inmates as he has repeatedly started fights. And in prison, Wallace is not bored at all. He married prison nurse Rebecca Torrija on June 5, 1998, and then they exchanged vows in a small room right next to the execution chamber. And memories of his wedding day almost certainly ease his existence. If he accidentally glances into the corridor leading to the room where the execution ceremony will be held, he will think not of death, but of his wedding. Moreover, already in prison, Wallace stated that there were many more who were unlucky enough to let him into the house. Allegedly, he started his career even during his service in the Navy. If all this is true, then he is responsible for the deaths of at least 20 women. Now he awaits execution. That's the story, friends. The opinion about Wallace is mostly unequivocal. He is dangerous and should be isolated from society. However, a debate is already flaring up here about the necessity of the death penalty. Is he really healthy, or maybe his behavior is a consequence of mental disorders? When you read about what he did and about the unfortunate girls he came to visit, you definitely think that this man deserves death. But then I personally started reading arguments against the death penalty and began to think. That's why it will be interesting for me to read what you think about this story and how you generally feel about capital punishment. Write what you think about this case and come to my channel to watch other stories. You can subscribe so you don't miss anything. Well, now I'll say goodbye to you. Good night and bye, everyone.